Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
History is often told from the perspective of the victors, leaving many dark and unsettling truths buried beneath layers of selective memory and national myth-making. One of the most overlooked tragedies in the annals of human suffering is the enslavement of Native Americans by European colonizers. While the transatlantic slave trade, which saw millions of Africans forced into brutal servitude, is widely acknowledged, the enslavement of indigenous peoples in the Americas remains a largely forgotten chapter of history. Yet, this atrocity was just as profound, shaping the trajectory of Native American societies and European colonial economies in ways that are still felt today. Before European contact, the indigenous peoples of North America lived in highly organized societies, each with distinct cultures, traditions, and systems of governance. Their lives were irrevocably changed with the arrival of European explorers, who viewed the land not as a shared space but as something to be conquered and exploited. One of the most insidious methods of this exploitation was the enslavement of native peoples. This brutal practice, which began almost immediately after Europeans set foot on American soil, continued for centuries and left deep scars on Native American communities. The enslavement of Native Americans was not an isolated phenomenon, but rather a systemic effort that saw indigenous people captured, sold, and transported across continents. Their fates varied. Some were forced to work on plantations, others were shipped to distant colonies, and many perished from disease, abuse, or outright execution. This history is both shocking and essential to understand, for it challenges the prevailing narratives of European conquest and the foundation of the Americas. The reality of Native American slavery is a disturbing tale of betrayal, cruelty, and resilience. It is a story of entire populations being decimated by warfare and disease, of families being torn apart, and of European settlers profiting from human suffering. At the same time, it is also a story of resistance, of Native people fighting back, escaping captivity, and refusing to be erased from history. Their struggle for survival against overwhelming odds deserve to be recognized and remembered. This article will delve into the harrowing truths surrounding the enslavement of Native Americans, uncovering the extent of their suffering and the enduring impact of this forgotten tragedy. It is an exploration of a history that has been suppressed, revealing how Native American enslavement shaped the development of colonial economies, influenced policies of displacement, and contributed to the broader framework of racial oppression in the New World. By shedding light on this history, we seek to give voice to those who were silenced, to honor the resilience of Native American communities, and to challenge the way history is told. The legacy of Native American enslavement is not just a story of the past. It is a living history that continues to affect indigenous communities today. Understanding it is not only an act of historical justice, but also a necessary step toward truth and reconciliation. The origins of Native American slavery can be traced back to the earliest days of European exploration. When Christopher Columbus first arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, he and his men quickly realized the economic potential of enslaving the indigenous populations they encountered. Columbus himself wrote about the ease with which the Taino people could be captured and used for labor, and within a few years, thousands of native Caribbeans were forced into servitude. Many were shipped to Spain, where they were sold in markets as exotic commodities, while others were used to extract the riches of the New World. As European colonization spread, so too did the practice of enslaving Native Americans. The Spanish, Portuguese, French, Dutch, and English all engaged in the practice at various points, each with their own methods of subjugation. The Spanish encomienda system, for example, granted settlers control over indigenous communities, forcing them to work in mines and plantations under brutal conditions. The English and French, on the other hand, often relied on native allies to capture rival tribes and sell them into slavery. Native American enslavement was particularly rampant in the southeastern and northeastern regions of North America, where the demand for labor was high. The Carolinas, in particular, became a hub for the native slave trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. English colonists, eager to expand their plantations, made deals with powerful native tribes, encouraging them to raid neighboring villages and capture prisoners to be sold as slaves. These captives were then transported to the Caribbean, where they were sold alongside African slaves, or forced to work on colonial plantations. The sheer scale of the Native American slave trade is staggering. Historians estimate that between 2 to 5 million indigenous people were enslaved between the 16th and 19th centuries. Many of these individuals never saw their families again, their identities erased, their languages and traditions lost. Unlike African slaves, who were often kept for life and whose children inherited their status, Native American slaves were sometimes sold into temporary bondage. However, the conditions they endured were just as brutal, and the mortality rate among them was exceptionally high. While the capture of Native Americans was often carried out by rival tribes, it was the European colonists who orchestrated and profited from the trade. The demand for labor in the Americas was insatiable, and native slaves were seen as an easy source of human capital. European settlers built economies around the sale and exploitation of indigenous captives, treating them as mere commodities to be bought and sold. One of the key drivers of Native American slavery was the insatiable demand for agricultural labor. Plantations in the American South, the Caribbean, and even as far away as Portugal relied on native slaves to cultivate crops such as tobacco, sugar, and cotton. The harsh conditions of plantation life led to high mortality rates, forcing traders to constantly seek new captives. In many cases, Native American slaves were preferred over African slaves in the early years of colonization due to their knowledge of the land and their ability to withstand local climates. However, they also proved more difficult to control. Many indigenous captives escaped into the wilderness, using their knowledge of the terrain to evade recapture. Others resisted violently, leading to bloody conflicts between native tribes and colonial forces. The European legal system also played a role in perpetuating Native American slavery. Colonial governments passed laws that legitimized the enslavement of indigenous peoples, stripping them of their rights and justifying their subjugation through racist ideologies. Some colonies even established legal frameworks that allowed for the perpetual enslavement of Native Americans, ensuring that their descendants would remain in bondage for generations. The history of Native American slavery is one of immense suffering, resilience, and resistance. Though often overshadowed by the transatlantic African slave trade, the enslavement of indigenous peoples played a crucial role in shaping the early history of the Americas. It was a system built on exploitation, driven by greed, and justified by deeply ingrained prejudices. Understanding this history is vital, not just to acknowledge the pain and trauma endured by Native American communities, but also to recognize the resilience and strength they displayed in the face of unimaginable hardship. The scars of this dark past remain, influencing modern issues of indigenous rights, land disputes, and systemic inequalities. By uncovering these hidden histories, we take a step toward justice, ensuring that the voices of those who suffered are never forgotten.